Hello, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the SSF Romcast. I am, as always, Jessica Haynes, and I'm joined by, well, who I'm usually joined by.
Yes. Emma Jackson. We are the normal hosts, but we have a fabulous panel here today with us. Just before we ask them to introduce themselves, we were just going to talk a little bit about what inspired the idea for this panel. So we're going to be asking some questions about kind of the differences for writing for YA audiences and adult audiences. So listeners to the podcast will know we do tend to cover mostly sci-fi and fantasy romance for adults, but we occasionally dip in to YA and NA as well. And I came to find the genre kind of through YA fantasy as well, when it was like in a sort of the boom of around Twilight, Hunger Games, that kind of time.
Goes back.
Yes, so we've had loads of sort of discussions on the podcast in the past about what it is that makes it quite different. You know, people can be sort of kind of approach it quite simply about, oh, well, obviously it's the protagonist being young and for adults, they're adults. But we kind of feel like there's a bit more nuance to it than that. And we would
Yes,
love to ask some experts who
yes.
we have here. Yeah, if we could start with Brigid and just introduce yourself and your books, and then if we can move through the panel and introduce yourself to our lovely listeners.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Pardon me. I'm Brigid Kemmerer. I am mostly known for my YA novels. My best known ones are books like A Curse So Dark and Lonely and Defy the Night. But I do have about 18 YA novels just kind of across the spectrum. And my newest is an adult romantic fantasy warrior princess assassin that just came out a short while ago. And I'm really excited to be moving into the adult space and talking about characters doing, more grown-up things.
Excellent. And looking at the cover just behind you, I'm also very interested as well.
Oh, thank you.
Fabulous. Yeah, so Kalynn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kalynn Bayron. I am a young adult and middle grade author. I am probably my most well-known book is Cinderella is Dead, but my most recent work is Make Me a Monster, which comes out on September 30th. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
It's fabulous. That will actually be today when this goes out. We're recording a couple of
Yeah.
weeks in advance. But yes, so if you're listening, get straight out there and get that book.
Mm.
Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ruth Frances Long. I also write as Jessica Thorne, so I have a pen name in the mix here as well. I was originally writing fantasy for adults. I then, as you mentioned, the YA boom, I inadvertently started writing YA. So I wrote Treachery of Beautiful Things, and I wrote A Crack in Everything, which is the Dublin series, which is Irish fairy fantasy. And then more recently, I have been writing adult fantasy again. So the most recent books are, for Jessica Thorne, is A Touch of Shadows, and for Ruth Frances Long is the book Gold, which just came out in the US this month on the 9th. So that's very exciting. It's been out over on this side of the pond for a little bit longer, and the sequel to that, The Lure of Silver, will be out in November. So that's me. I'm writing all over the place.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Sarah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Raughley. I'm an author and also a professor at a university. So I'm kind of doing both, English professor, so it all goes together. I'm mostly a YA author, so I've published books in the YA space, the Effigy series, the Effigy trilogy, starting with Fate of Flames, Siege of Shadows, and Legacy of Light, and also the Bones of Ruin trilogy. My latest books are The Queen's Spade, which is actually kind of, I don't know, HarperCollins pitches it as a YA adult crossover. So I guess I'm definitely gonna have like an interesting viewpoint for this uh, for this discussion. And my latest book is called Live Wire, which is more specifically YA.
Yeah.
So I do
It's
have a
it's like
little
got
bit.
a K-pop kind of thing, which must be
Yes,
very,
yeah.
very good timing at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Can I just quickly say that if it were not for Brigid Kemmerer, yes, if it were not for you, Brigid, I don't know if I would have published The Fade Flames because I have emails going back to 2011. Remember? I sent you
I
one.
do. That's so amazing. And I can't believe that
It
we
was so
discovered that when
crazy.
we were looking at things.
Yeah.
But no, I had nothing to do with it. I'm so happy that you are here, and I think it's amazing how publishing careers can just change and grow.
Yes, yeah.
And yeah, I'm so happy for you.
Well, I'm just thankful that you encouraged me, and I'm thankful to all of the authors that have brought me here. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, I was going to say we had a list of questions, but I think I just want to get rid of
Yeah.
those and just have a bit of a natter with everybody now.
Oh, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, I will get on to questions. That's what we're here for. So, sorry. So, listeners and viewers. Okay, so question number 1. So, there has been, as everybody has seen, especially if you're anywhere near TikTok, massive explosion in romantasy, particularly in the adult market. So, Brigid, as someone who was established within YA and has just debuted recently your new adult one, do you think there are less adults reading YA now? And is that a good thing because of the differences in what the readers expect?
You know, I think that there is something really amazing about fantasy and fantasy romance that allows readers and authors to kind of really tackle some, I don't know, really complex topics in a very accessible way, in a very fun way. You know, if we read about the world kind of being on fire in a contemporary novel, it feels a little too close to home. But, you know, if we have characters who are really kind of combating things out in the world, that are kind of wrapped up in magic or adventure or castles or, you know, those kinds of things, it makes it just a little bit more accessible. And I think that's a big part of the reason why so many people have flocked to romantasy and fantasy romance. And I think for a long time, so many women were kind of shoehorned into the YA space because the adult fantasy space was handled so heavily by men primarily. So many women were kind of pushed into the YA space. And I think adult readers, that's where they found us writing as authors. And I think, you know, thanks to the popularity of book talk, so many people have been so open about how much they love romantasy that more and more authors have kind of had the freedom and the space to age up their characters, to move into the adult market. But that doesn't mean that those same adult readers aren't still reading YA. I do think, sorry, this is such a long answer. I do think that YA is due for kind of a reset. You know, I think YA had kind of aged up as far as content for quite a while, where we were getting a lot more intimacy, a lot more adult situations, but just kind of about like 18 and 19-year-olds. I do think YA is about to go through a massive reset where it will go back to being focused for younger readers, but still very accessible and very readable by adults. I have always loved YA. You know, I loved it back in, you know, the early 2000s and the 2010s, and I don't see my love for YA going away. And I think that's probably true for a lot of adults.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that question? We good. Do we think Brigid covered it all? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, but yeah, just sort of a point. Me and Emma did an episode a little bit ago about trying to find where we found like the first adult romantasy sort of books, and it was kind of, it took quite a while for it to kind of the women to take charge in like the late 90s. Sort of before that, the men were just dominating every space. It was quite noticeable when we went back and had a look.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think we've got a question a bit later as well about that as well, like sort of that, as you mentioned, the pushing of women into that space, and yeah, whether a similar thing is happening and with romantasy. So we'll go on to the next question. Kalynn, So, with Make Me a Monster and My Dear Henry, you remixed two classic sci-fi horror novels, which are sort of originally aimed at adults, but your books were for a YA audience. What decisions did you have to make when it came to sort of the intricacy of the plot and themes? And were there things that you consciously explored in different ways because you had a younger audience?
Yeah, so both Make Me a Monster and My Dear Henry come out of some very recognizable Gothic fiction. And I think that in both Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein, there are themes of the other, and to a large extent grief, power, access to power, and morality, all of these things. And these are not things that young people are immune from dealing with. Young people face these same kinds of issues and challenges in their everyday lives. And so I think it's really about the delivery of this information versus the content of it. I think our young people can handle quite a bit, and they don't like to be talked down to. They want something that is for them, but that doesn't make them feel like you're baby talking them. And so I have found that just communicating these themes to them through Make Me a Monster and Jekyll and Hyde has been really kind of a freeing experience. It's nice to be able to take on these themes of Gothic horror and present them to a modern audience, and still keep that that Gothic heart intact. I think there's something really special about that. And so yeah, I think that for me, I'm always kind of in the back of my mind keeping in mind my readers and who I'm writing for and towards. And I think, kind of like Brigid was saying, there's this thing happening in YA right now where even publishers are saying we need to refocus. We need to kind of get back to young adult novels being for young adults. And let's think about what that looks like and how we can kind of reinforce that. I think there's also this issue of literacy that we are dealing with in our young readers. And COVID was really hard on a lot of our young people and young readers. And so some of them are really struggling. And so kind of making sure that that young adult is for young adults and middle grade is for middle grade, making sure that we are kind of targeting those readers, especially those who are struggling, so that we can get them kind of spark a love of reading is really important. So kind of off on a tangent there, but all of that to say, I do kind of keep in mind what my readers need. And even when I'm inspired by these very kind of gruesome Gothic tales.
Our kids love gruesome stuff, though, don't they?
Oh, they do. They really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they ask for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't count how many my nearly 15-year-old has with murder in the title that she brings to me. I'm like, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've just discovered the One of Us is Lying series with my teenage daughter as well, and she's very into that. The whole, you would think, oh, this is a bit morbid, but no, they love it.
No,
They
they're
absolutely
far and
love
away.
it.
Yeah. Okay, so going on to a little bit more. Often in sci-fi and fantasy romance, we deal with a lot of stakes, both at the character and the world level. Sarah, do you feel like writing for young adults puts more pressure on you to have the answers that might fix all of these problems, or for having to have a more optimistic outlook, possibly because you're writing for the young audience rather than adults?
My approach has always been to understand that young people can handle a lot and not to talk down to them, not to assume that they need a more positive outlook. I think when it comes to YA, it's always been for me more about understanding the psyche of young adults, where they are, how they would solve these problems. Um, and that doesn't really have anything to do with whether it's it ends up in a tragedy or not, because I think, again, a young adult readership can handle a book that doesn't end well. I think what they want specifically, though, is if the book's not going to end well, how do they understand it from their perspective? Why did it come about through those particular characters, right? Why would a group of 16-year-olds handle an issue differently than a group of 36-year-olds or 26-year-olds, and just making it authentic? With science fiction and fantasy and speculative, I feel like the stakes are always going to feel more epic, but not necessarily bigger. It really depends on the point of view, right? I mean, Cancer, right? Like their faults in our stars. You know, that's those are very high stakes, even if it's contemporary. So I always just approach it not necessarily in, oh, it's why so it has to be a happy ending, but just whatever ending that you write, it has to make sense and be authentic for that audience.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Has anybody else got any thoughts on that before we dive on? No.
Right. So sometimes there's a really hard line drawn about sex in young adult novels, that it should not be gratuitous. Ruth, how do you feel about that opinion, especially in comparisons to how like violence is treated, gratuitous violence, or how that's
Yeah,
kind of dealt with differently? And do you think there's been any shift in these areas when it comes to YA over recent years, for the better or the worse?
certainly, there used to be a much harder line on sex in YA. That has shifted, I think, very much so of late. I think, as many people are pointing out here, YA is looking at a reset at the moment. And I think we are going to see the younger. So I think the sexier stuff, the spicier stuff is moving into romantasy and sort of being gently escorted to a slightly different area, which is fine, because I think we ended up at one point with something that was ostensibly titled YA trying to reach a much broader audience than necessarily was appropriate, shall we say. It's up to, I'm very much, I'm a librarian by day. Sounds like a superhero starting. But I am a librarian by day, and I used to work in public libraries. I am very much of the opinion that children and teenagers will find the books that they need to read at a time they need to read them. And I think, from having my own children grow up reading quite freely, it's something, we always had a rule that if something bothered them, if they didn't understand something, if there was a problem, they could come and talk to myself and my husband about it. And they did. It was rarely about sex, thank goodness. But it was, about characters taking drugs or something like that. We had various discussions. And I think it's really important when you're dealing with young readers to be open and honest with them. And I think that's kind of the line, if you like. So long as you are honest about what they're reading and about what you're writing, they don't like to be talked down to, as I think Brigid said earlier. It's and they know the moment that you try. I mean, they absolutely know. So yes, I mean, I also came up through a romance sphere, as you two did, where we're very comfortable with sex on the page, and I think it's nice and refreshing to see emotional life, particularly of women, but of all sorts of people, centered in a story, which we don't see in other genres. And I think that's one of the most important things about romance, is that it centers in the emotional life of the characters, and we get to see, instead of a toxic masculinity, we get to see a positive masculinity held as in most books, held as the ideal. And all of these things sort of come together I think in romantasy, we are seeing that getting pushed bigger and broader and brighter. And a lot of those questions are now being asked in these books. And yes, there are toxic elements in some of the stories, but I think they're questioned. And I think that's one of the valuable things about it. When I was writing A Touch of Shadows, it's a fated mate story. So I wanted to look at the question of consent in that situation, for example, because if you are magically drawn to love someone, have you actually consented to having a relationship to them? Because the magic has done it. So it was questions like that, which I think romantasy can tackle really, really well. So yeah, I mean, it is a very complex thing, but I would come back to for young adult, trusting our readers and being open and honest with them. And then the move into romantasy, I think it's just a natural progression. I think it's come out of young adult. It's also come out of fan fiction. It's also harking back to much earlier books, so sort of Diana Wynne Jones and Anne McCaffrey and people like that. We can see, and Anne Bishop, we can see romantasy things when you start looking back at the history of fantasy romance. There's all of these elements that are now coming through. I've done a few panels recently where people have gone, this brand new genre, and you're sort of going, well, actually, we have been around for a little while. But it's great. It's lovely. It's just so fantastic to see it having its moment. And, I think we're all here for that.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, me and Emma, sort of, when we first met in 2020, it was just such on the back burner in the UK, more so. And it was just, trying to shove it at people however we could, which is how the podcast was born. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, it's me. Sorry, it's me.
It's you.
All right, so we're going to throw this out to everybody. I will kind of name you so you don't have to put your hands up and stuff. It does feel a bit all classroomish. Okay, so do you think the new adult category helps to bridge any particular gaps between adult and YA? Or do you think it is just confusing people now? And let's go alphabetical. Brigid, do you want to throw in with this one?
Sure. I don't necessarily think that it's confusing. I do love that the new adult category is allowing for younger characters, not like YA young, but like younger characters having those first moments of intimacy in a way where it's clear that it's more of a celebration of that intimacy. Whereas I feel like YA, and this kind of, Ruth, goes back to, what you were talking about, like what teenagers could, were reading. Whereas in YA, I feel like it's more of an exploration of intimacy. It's like discovering those emotions for the first time. It's a very safe way. I'm not opposed to any kind of intimacy on the page for teenagers. I think reading is probably the safest way to encounter any kind of new experience or new emotion. But it's one of those things where it when you see it. And there's a very big difference between, reading intimacy that is truly written, for the reader to kind of celebrate and enjoy, and empowering for women, versus intimacy that's written in a way where we're learning about ourselves and we're discovering ourselves. And I do think that the new adult genre does bridge that gap a little bit, because I think truly adult romance, especially, can feel really, really adult. And YA, especially as we're moving back into it, can feel really YA. And I think there's a great space right in there, that college age where we've moved past our first brush with independence, but we're not out there paying a mortgage yet, right? And even in fantasy, whatever the fantasy counterpart would be.
Yeah, awesome. Kalynn, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Brigid said. I think there really is a good opportunity here. I wish publishing would get on board a little more. I think there's so much space between readers who are kind of aging out of YA. Nobody ever really ages out of YA, if we're being honest, but there are readers who are saying, okay, this is great, I love this, but what's next? What comes next? There's so much space there. There is, college setting, there is, living on your own for the first time, there's relationships, dating, and even if we're moving into things like thrillers and horror, there's some space there for characters who are adults fully, but maybe not 35 and divorced with 3 kids, or whatever. It's like, there's some space there for kind of a younger audience. And so I think where it gets confusing, and I don't really think it's confusing, but where I think maybe the perception that it's confusing comes from is like the marketing side of things. Where do I put this book on the shelf when I go into a bookstore or a library versus what is the content on the page? And so I think those two things are not quite lining up yet. And so we have this new adult space. And it's like, oh, well, where do I put it? Do we put it in the YA? Do we put it in the adult? And without kind of making room for it on its own. So I think that, maybe there is a little bit of a gray area. But again, publishing could get behind it and help kind of right those wrongs.
Yeah, champion it along a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh, Ruth, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I find new adult quite fascinating. Back in 2011 or 2012, I think Treachery of Beautiful Things was among the first books to get the new adult tag. It was St. Martin's Press that came up with it, or claimed to come up with it. They had a competition because they felt that YA was getting older thematically, and they were trying to champion new adult then. And I think I entered the opening of the book in it at the time. And it allows you to deal with different themes, perhaps, than YA. I think a lot of it just got absorbed back into YA, though. I think that's sort of, I think people, the confusion factor is that I think people were comfortable with what YA was. And I don't think they understood the progression. And whether that's because of marketing or because of shops or whatever, it's hard to tell. It's funny that it still hasn't quite gelled, which is fascinating. Because while we now have the romantasy elements, or romantasy as a new subgenre, other YA genres, because YA itself is such a broad field and it takes in so much, it's not just fantasy. They don't really have anywhere to go except for full adults. So yeah, it is something of value. It just never seems to quite make it. Are we trying to make fetch happen?
Yeah, we need to push it a bit further up the hill so it can roll down. All right, Sarah, coming in at the end. Sorry, you hopefully you've got something to add.
No, everybody's said so many amazing things. And I've just been thinking, the new adults, I feel like there's a difference between traditional publishing, and we also have to think about indie publishing and self-publishing. And I almost feel like it's mostly traditional publishing that seems to have this issue with new adult, particularly for the reasons that have already been said, right? Like marketing and young adults has, I think, especially since Twilight and sort of the paranormal romance era, and that it's been sort of trying to cater to an older audience. And so I feel like there are two spaces, two market categories that really, really need to come back. And and be given a chance. And that's new adult and lower YA. Because there was a time when it was almost like adult readers colonized the space of young adult. And it was like, and that's why even today, you talk about book talk, I still have readers asking me like, what's the spice level of this book? And it's like, this is a YA book. Like, why are you asking?
Yep.
Why are you asking the spice level? But it's like they're used to YA sort of catering to them. And then you have like young people who don't really, they're too old for adult, but they're now fine, or they're too old for middle grade, but they're not really finding themselves represented in YA because they feel like it's too old for them. And then you have young adults who are sort of aging out of the category and wanting something that's reflecting their lives. They're going to university for the first time, and all of the issues that sort of happen when you're in that age space. So maybe they're not going to be going to trade publishing books anymore. Maybe they're going to be looking for self-published books. And I think that's a lot of money that maybe trade publishing is leaving on the table. But I do know that romantasy, specifically, of all sort of, ages, like new adults, adult, that's doing well in the indie publishing space, in the self-publishing space. And you're seeing a lot of those self-publishers being brought into, being given those deals and being lured into, HarperCollins and Simon and Schuster, because they're building their own fan base, right? They're finding their own readers. So clearly there's a demand for new adults. There's a need for new adult. There's a need for these interstitial spaces. It's just about whether trade publishing gets on board. And if not, then people are going to do it themselves and find their own audiences.
Well, yeah, this is it. Same as romantasy has had this massive blow up that hopefully in another year they'll get on the NA bandwagon and we could be chatting about that next time.
Well, that's like you were saying earlier, Jess, wasn't it? When we first started the podcast, that was where everybody had to go. So like probably I would say like 90% of the books we talked about were indie published.
Self-published stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and then like you said, Sarah, they're being snapped up now, all of those authors that have been out there working very hard, and then they become an overnight success with a traditional publisher kind of thing. But
yeah, I was going to say
they've been working very hard a long time.
We know who they are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so recently, talking of book talk, I noticed a reviewer had said they were commenting on The Will of the Many, which was like a really big book last year that blew up over there, went viral. And they said that if it had been written by a woman, it probably would have been categorized as YA because of the age of the protagonist and the school setting. Do you think that's true for a lot of science fiction and fantasy books, especially if they contain any romance whatsoever? Has romantasy sort of opened up a different space for authors who identify as women that they're being pushed into, or is there like more nuance to it than that? Because we talked earlier about YA, a lot of female authors were being pushed into YA when they wrote fantasy. So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that, if we start with Brigid.
Maybe. Like, I do think that we are getting to a point where women are finally really taking up space in the, for adult readers in both fantasy and sci-fi. But with a teenage protagonist, it's really hard to say depending on like how the book is written. I feel like there are books written for adults about teenagers. Probably one of the most famous ones is like Stephen King's It. That book is clearly written for adults to read about teenagers. So I think it would really depend on the theme and how the teenagers' kind of story arc progressed. But I hate to say it, I do think that with a woman writing it about a teenager, it might have gotten shoehorned right into YA.
What does anyone else think? And Kalynn, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that it would have been pushed into the YA space if it had been a woman writing it. I don't know. I feel like, I've had people ask me to my face when I'm going to write a real book, and I write young adult fiction. I write middle grade stories. It's kind of like there's this thought process that if you're writing for children, or if you're, and I don't know this for a fact, but for a few people that I've talked to, women who are writing romantic fantasy, or fantasy romance, that people are like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, but are you going to do something else? It's like it's minimized. It's like the work is minimized just because you're a woman writing it. And I think that welcome to the patriarchy. Like it's a constant kind of battle against just this kind of backwards thinking. And I don't, and even in literary spaces, it's kind of like you would think that people who love books and reading and would be a little more they'd be able to have a little more nuance about this topic, and sometimes they don't. And so it's for that specific book, I definitely think it would have been put into a YA category if a woman had written it. And I wish that we didn't have to have those types of conversations, but we do. And so I also think that romance in general kind of gets a bad rap sometimes. It's just kind of like people look down on the genre because it's mostly by women, and mostly women and people who identify as women love it. And it's kind of like, oh, well, that's just not as valid. And why? So, yeah, I think there's a lot of different things, a lot of different forces that we're pushing against in that space. But I'm hopeful because we've seen this kind of resurgence and the of the genre, and we see things like romantasy, which are just fabulous, fabulous stories that are coming out with this amazing world building and this great characterization and all of these wonderful plot points and things that we just love. And you see it a lot on Book Talk, and it's on the news, and it feels like a real kind of watershed moment. And so I'm hoping that carries forward, and that it allows people who have these stories, women who have wanted to write these stories but felt like maybe they shouldn't or couldn't because they don't want to be kind of boxed in. I hope that this kind of lets you know that there's a place for you, and that you can write these stories, and that you can have, this wonderful audience there. So yeah, it's a nuanced issue for sure.
Yeah, Ruth, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel that happens, that because I've been on panels recently talking about books of fantasy that we've written, and we're automatically assigned as romantasy. If there is a love story in it, and if it is written by a woman, it's going to happen. So the Book of Gold is an alternative history set in the Renaissance era. There is a love story, there's several love stories, and there is magic, and I am constantly being told it's romantasy. It's not to me. It's just straight up fantasy with a romance in it. Whereas A Touch of Shadows and the next books after that, I actually set out to write a romantasy. That was the idea. So I look on them as very different books. I think I can think of a number of male writers that had they used feminine pen names, they would absolutely be classed as romantasy. So, for example, and I am not dissing this book at all because I think they're amazing. They're really, really good. Jay Kristoff's vampire series, Empire of the Vampire, Empire of the Damned, and Empire of the Dawn is the new one, which is coming out. So we'll give Jay a plug because he really doesn't need it. But they are romantasy. I'm sorry, but they are. They're amazing. They've got vampires, they've got sex, they've got extreme violence. They're exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the themes in these books. But also it has ever been thus. I mean, it's if you look at the most glaring one to me is Colin Devine's Brooklyn, masterpiece of literature, etc., etc., etc. It's fabulous. If it was a woman, it would have been classed as women's fiction. And it may have been very successful women's fiction, but it would not be winning awards, and it would not be in films starring Saoirse Ronan, and it would not be this cultural icon that it is, and deservedly, because I think it would have been dismissed as women's fiction. So I'm a little bit down on that, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yes, we're all having a moment there, aren't we?
Yeah, sorry
Nah.
for putting that question in there.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Sarah, do you have anything else to add?
Boo patriarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. I don't know. For me, I sometimes get mired in thinking about all of the different constraints that I have. I'm a female writer. I'm a Black writer. There are a lot of things that we haven't yet discussed about, romantasy as a genre fitting all these other identities, right? And which romantasies sort of get uplifted and supported, right? While, romantasies starring Black women, for example, like, are they supported as much? Are they given as much marketing push, et cetera, et cetera? That sort of thing, I think, can get you down as a reader, yes, but as a writer, especially. I know that there are power structures, most definitely in the publishing industry, and amongst the readership, because that's the world we live in. And as we continue to try to break down those barriers, I think we need to continue to write. For me, I write and I worry about the categorization later. I don't set out to think about, like, I don't set out thinking I'm going to write a romantasy novel. I just think of this idea and I write it, and then I think about, okay, how do we sell it? And sometimes that works against me because, I write something that the publishers don't know how to, categorize and sell, or aren't willing to sell it, or aren't willing to buy it, or, readers don't know what to do with it, et cetera, et cetera. But at least I've written something that means something to me. And that comes first and foremost. But we do have to continue to raise our voices about the inequities. Otherwise, they won't go away.
Yeah, there's so much about publishing which is like self-fulfilling prophecy from the standpoint of like traditional publishing. They say this won't sell, but they only sell certain books, and then it reinforces their sales figures, and then they don't follow through. And it's wonderful to see more diversity. Like indie publishing really opens that up, I think, in being able to see that, but you have to be able to find it and look for it, and champion those stories and champion those voices.
I was going to say that's what we've been trying to do for the last few years, especially just getting everything out there. And yeah, as you said, Emma, the indie scene is the one that you lean into it and they could give you so much. It's just fantastic. Okay, so I think this is the last question that we have. Let's throw that out there. So what popular tropes do you think are more common when writing YA or adult audiences, and why do you think that is? So Sarah, let's go to you first. You can we'll throw it a bit backwards now.
Are we talking romantasy tropes or just romance tropes?
Any. So if we kind of, if there are any that are sort of specifically romantic, we can add in and then throw in a few more afterwards.
I don't know if this is like an actual like popular trope, but I will, like, just a little story. I came across the term shadow daddy.
Yes.
And I was like, what is this? What does this mean? Where did it come from? It just seemed so like provocative. So I was like, I literally asked my followers, like, somebody explain to me what this is. And they told me about it. And I was like, this is so strange and specific. And there's just so many tropes. I think Book Talk like brought in the era of tropes, which is so different. Like back in the 2010s, if you were to see a book being marketed, you'd see maybe the book cover and then like a summary of what the book is actually about. And now it's more common to market your book by having like, here's the cover of the book, and then like little lines that say like, here are the tropes.
Yeah.
So like I have ones that I love, like one bed, there's only one bed. Various things like enemies to lovers. Some people don't like that. Some people feel like can't be done well. I like childhood friends to lovers and various things, but we have gotten to a very tropey era, I think, in both YA and adult. And I don't know if I think it's had some good, I think it's good, but also had some negative repercussions. I'll leave it there. I'm curious to hear what other people think about it.
Well, yeah, this is it.
the tropification of YA and adult.
Yeah, when microtrope is a thing, you've got to kind of go, okay, how big is trope then? If we're now on the micro ones, it's where do we stop? Ruth, let's throw it at you.
Yeah, well, I actually published a book and then got told I'd written a shadow mummy. So there we go.
Down with the patriarchy. Get in there.
Down with the patriarchy. Yeah, I mean, again, tropes, I think, very much coming out of fan fiction. They're a great shorthand for, you know, what is going to be in this story that I absolutely love. And you can, you know, if you get, I don't know if anyone here does read fan fiction. I personally love it. The tropes kind of came as a way to scan through what was going to be in the story, so you could find the things you were interested in. And yeah, that in that they're very effective. They literally do exactly what it says in the tin. You can I want this, and this, and pick up your book. So I think it's a really easy shortcut for marketing. And I think we're back to marketing again. What are you doing? Because it can be quite reductive, and it can be it can mean things get dismissed and get miscategorized and kind of get treated as lesser. Possibly they're a bit silly, possibly. And again, we're from a romance perspective, we've seen that time and time again. You know, this is a friends to lovers story. Oh, it's one of them. Oh, it's a bit silly. Oh, it's, you know, it's not going to have any serious content to it. It's just a fluffy thing. So I do think there is a danger of that. That said, I love me a trope. They're so much fun. And I'd say Only One Bed, I actually clapped because that is my favorite. That's my one. And I do tend to put that in every so often just for the hell of it. And sometimes just open a chapter with There Was Only One Bed. And I was reading, I think it was a KJ Charles book recently, and she opened a chapter with There Was Only One Bed. And I was just like, yes, because it's like catnip. When it's your trope, when it's the thing you love, it's just like, I cannot wait to read this. I'm absolutely here for it. So yeah, they're a double-edged sword, which is probably also a trope.
I was going to say, well, it is now. We're going to make it so. Kalynn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do love a good trope. I think I go and I have the ones that I like the most, and I find other titles that have those, and I like it. You know, that's kind of how I know we're talking mostly about romance and romantasy and things like that, but I also am a horror writer, and I've used the only one bed trope in a horror novel. Just, you know, I think it's fun. There's now under the only one bed is probably a serial killer, but you know, that's neither here nor there. But you know, I think it's about how you use it and trying to find just fun, engaging ways to use those types of tropes. And then when it comes to YA, you know, I think in YA and in middle grade, it's like we see a lot of, you know, happy endings are very prevalent. And I think there's also just kind of like this thread of hope that moves through a lot of stories for younger readers. But I think that it's just because young people, I mean, all of us really, I mean, it's not really, you know, specifically for young readers, but I think we all kind of want to feel seen, and we kind of, you know, if you're a bit of an outcast, you maybe want to feel important. You want to be the chosen one, which is also another trope that comes across a lot. You know, that feels nice sometimes. And so I really just think it's about kind of what you're doing, how you're using it, and how it plays into the overall narrative of the story. But yeah, I love an enemies to lovers. I love a friends to enemies to lovers to enemies. That's what I like. I want us to be fighting at the end. Like, it's just like we can't stand it. So yeah.
Yeah, you can full circle.
yeah, all the way.
And Brigid, coming to you last.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add that you guys haven't already said, and you've said it so well. So I'm just going to throw out that I do love tropes. I love enemies to lovers. I love friends to lovers. I love forced proximity. There was only one bed. There was only one horse. I love anything where it's like a hurt comfort. type trope. That's one of my absolute favorites. I really leaned hard into that in Warrior Princess Assassin. And I think for people who want tropes, I love that so many people just list them out there. So you can be like, oh yes, I want that one. I want that book because it has these tropes that I absolutely love. And I think it's easy enough for people to avoid if they would rather just go read the full summary or, read the first couple pages and see if a book is something that they're going to like. No, I do. I like it that people are being very forward about the tropes included in their books, both in YA and in fantasy romance and, all those gray areas in between.
Yep. We did a festival recently in the summer over here, and what we found was we did a bit of a questionnaire for people to come and tick which was their favourite. And weirdly, the bodyguard trope got so many votes, and we thought it'd be really near the bottom. But yeah, it was flying high, weren't it, Emma?
Yeah, really. We were surprised. I mean, Enemies to Lovers was up there.
It was second,
absolutely.
yes, but...
yeah, but
Can I add something else? Sorry, just
Course,
thought occurred to me there. I suddenly thought of fairy tales and how many of our tropes kind of come from fairy tales as well. And young adult and romantasy has done an awful lot of fairy tale retellings. So I wonder if that's another source of a lot of this.
It could well be, yeah. I mean, God, we've done retellings. There's so many. We were looking at Hades and Persephone one time, and just the books were stacking up. There was we couldn't pick one to read. There were so many. It's
love
fabulous,
Hades
honestly.
and Persephone retelling.
Love it.
Yeah, because a lot of the retellings, it's kind of it's the same principle, isn't it? You know, it's that retelling, so you've got a gist of what the story's going to be, and then the fun bit is finding out how the author's played with it and what bits they're going to subvert and stuff like that.
Is that the comfort of it as well? And the comfort of tropes is that we know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's not going to be unless there's a really horrible surprise. There's not going to be a horrible surprise.
That serial
I'm thinking
killer under the bed.
Under
the bed. That's it now.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant, by the way.
I was going to say, am I going to be the only one who's going to Google that for a Dark Romance later? Just
maybe. I don't know. You do like. Well, they say that horror romance is going to be kind of a new one that's coming through. That people are leaning a bit darker.
Make Me a Monster is a horror romance.
There we
so
go.
I was like, yeah, let's go all the way there with both of those things. Yeah.
And I am here for that. Thank you all so much for being here. I, for one, want to say I have 2 teenage daughters, so thank you for the thoughts and feelings everybody is putting into their books, and I know that they are secure in your capable hands. That's just coming from me. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, putting the words on the page, and spending your time answering the questions as well as you've done.
Did you want to add, does anyone want to tell us something that is coming up next for you, or just give another little shout out to your latest releases? We'll go around one more time before we sign off. So we start with Sarah.
My latest book, Livewire, is YA sci-fi. Again, if you're into K-pop demon hunters, this will probably be up your alley. It came out September 2nd, and I had another book that was actually more of a historical romance that came out earlier in January called The Queen's Spade, very British book, because it actually dealt with the real story of Queen Victoria's African goddaughter. She really did have an African goddaughter, and once I learned that, I was like, I have to write her story, but turn it somehow into a revenge thriller. So there you go. And you can find my work at www.sarahrawley.com.
Thank you. Brilliant. Ruth?
Sorry, having a technical moment. I have the Book of Gold, which I have there, which is out at the moment. The Lore of Silver is out this is the old history Renaissance set. It has a book heist, it has printing, it has hidden gods, it has friends to enemies to lovers romance. So there we go. And I love it because I'm obsessed with early printing. So that's kind of what inspired it. And then A Touch of Shadows is my Jessica Thorne book, which is a fated mate's take on Rapunzel and Shadow Mummy. which is what our heroine is, as I was told. That's a trilogy. That's a complete trilogy. They're all out at the moment. 2 in print in the States, 1 more by Christmas, and the rest all online. You can find out all about me and my writing at www.rflong.com, and I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Kalynn?
Yeah, so I have Make Me a Monster is out as of the date that this airs. So please go pick up a copy. It is a Frankenstein-inspired horror romance. It's YA. It is full of twists and turns. And I love it so much. I hope you will give it a chance. And then I have a new middle grade series coming out next year. It's called Olive Oaks and the Haunted Carousel. That comes out in April. And yeah, that's what I've got going on. And you can find me at KalynBayron.com, and I am on Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Kalynn Bayron.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Brigid?
So Warrior Princess Assassin just came out in August. That is my first adult fantasy romance, and that's was so much fun to write. But then I also have my next YA is Sparking Fire Out of Fate, and that is the final in the Forging Silver trilogy, and that comes out in January.
Brilliant. Thank you. So many amazing books between you all. So many books. Yeah, we'll just thank you once again for joining us. And yeah, we'll be back with another panel next month, which will be a Gothic panel.
Gothic ones.
Yeah. It's all about Gothic romance. So thank you.
Thank you.